Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos. And although I sincerely hope that Andrew Lloyd Webber never gets ill, if he does, I hope when he goes to hospital they put him into the Stephen ward. Well, what a treat we have for you today. We are going to be talking about the Quentin Dentin Show cast album with two incredible people. Henry Carpenter, who of course is the creator of the show, and his collaborator Paul Garred, who worked with him to create the new original cast album. Paul, of course, is most famous as one of the founding members of the Kooks, a tremendously popular pop group. He was their drummer. But, and this will come as no surprise, he's tremendously musically talented and has interests in musical theatre and opera, and is also a great music producer, as you'll hear in this interview and when you listen to the new Quentin Dentin album. So, what does it take to create a new original cast album? Well, last week you heard from Luke Lane, the principal singer on it. He plays Quentin Dentin, and he told us about what a performer has to concentrate on and think about in order to make the album work. But of course the writer and the producer have something to say as well. And I've been absolutely fascinated about whether it counts as a new production and what kind of direction you have to give. And those are questions I asked in my conversation with Henry and Paul, plus a whole lot more. So let's get on with the main conversation. Courtesy of Henry, you'll hear some very short extracts from the brand new album during the course of the conversation, just to whet your appetite and to help illustrate some of the points that were discussed during this fantastic conversation. So come on everybody and buckle your pants. It's time to hear from Henry Carpenter and Paul Garred about the new original cast recording of the Quentin Dentin Show. Musical Talk.
Hello, I'm Henry Carpenter. I wrote the music and lyrics of the Quentin Dentin Show and have been a writer or co-writer on every version of the book, and I originated the character as well.
My name is Paul Garrett and I was the album producer.
And we're here today to talk about the Quentin Dentin Show album, which is, if you like, the iteration we're having for 2018. Yeah. I've had the privilege of hearing it and I think it's a masterpiece. I really do. I think it's fantastic and it bears repeated listening, because I can tell you that because I've been doing so. It's got depth, it's got excitement, and yet it grabs you from the first. So we'll be talking about that as we go on. There are a whole number of questions I'd like to start off with, but the first, I think, Paul, if I may say, is I've had the pleasure of talking to Henry on many occasions before, but you're, if you like, the new element in the mix for this. You're most famous, I think, and I hope you won't mind me saying this, for your being one of the founder members of the Kooks, but of course you do have interests and talents in the direction of theatre and opera. So tell me just a little bit of how you sort of landed with your feet in theatre. And obviously you bring to the table both sound design and an understanding of sound, but also a love of theatre and an interest in theatre, which play together in this kind of thing, surely.
Well, first and foremost, before music I always wanted to be an actor. And me and my sister, we studied acting. In fact, my sister still is an actress, but from 5 years old we were taken to drama school every week and just did that for up until I think I was about 18.
Clearly loving it then.
Loving it, yeah.
Not being dragged to the piano for piano lessons, but actually enjoying it.
That was it, and I think I dropped out for a couple of years maybe, just me, because I wanted to do more music and drums got in the way. In fact, actually, one thing that has really helped me throughout my whole entire life and career is that we did improvisation all the time. We had a brilliant teacher called Chris Stanley. She would hate me calling her Christine. And she was just a very experienced head who had a family, stopped her career, big family at that, five kids, I think. And we'd go to her house. And these sort of little things, actually, I don't think she'd mind me saying, like, if you said you couldn't do something, even as a 5-year-old, she had these like about 100 toys, and she'd throw them at you till you said you could. And little things like that just give you confidence. Now, a lot of people who went to that school throughout the years, because you had a 5-year-old in me maybe working with a 12-year-old, which is a big gap.
It is a range, yeah, absolutely.
And making sure and learning from them and all that sort of stuff, and learning from Chris too. All of those abilities have rolled in to where I am now. But anyway, going back to theatre, I've always been on stage one way or another. Reluctantly sometimes, actually, if I'm honest, because I think I'm more of a kind of, as the years go by, I like to be more the, inverted commas, brains behind something, as opposed to subjecting myself to, a role or whatever.
Well, that's a well-trodden path, isn't it? There's a lot of people who like to perform when they're younger and then realise that actually what they're really interested in is the organic creation of something, and that's often behind rather than in front.
Well, I think also, I'm sure you're very similar, Henry, but I'm very shy. People think I'm really, really confident, and in most social situations I am, unless I'm not in the mood. It's all an act. I'm acting.
I'm very grateful you're here then.
Yeah.
Well, you're very good, as a performer and as a performer of yourself. But I think the other thing that has come out of what you just described is that Paul has a really innate dramatic talent, and he's got a great understanding of pace that just kind of seems to be in his bones. Paul is someone who has an innate dramatic understanding.
Incredibly kind of you, Henry. I mean, I should probably mention that Henry and I, how we met each other. We ended up, after I'd finished music in a rock and roll band and wondering what I'm going to do with my life, I sort of re-entered society almost, and then decided, hang on a sec, this is way too boring. I need to get back into a world that I'm in love with, and theatre, musical theatre specifically, because of my love of seeing the show Evita in 1995 when I was about 8 years old in Eastbourne, with Marty Webb, who was about 52 at the time, I think. Crikey, she was phenomenal. She became Evita again 20 years after she did the role at the Prince Edward Theatre, having worked with Lloyd Webber for many, many years, I think, Tell Me on a Sunday, all that sort of stuff. Anyway, I mean, I've got stato-like brain when it comes to this kind of stuff. Anyway,
it's true. Great memory.
Seeing that production blew my mind. How it was constructed, why it freaked me out because of the darkness, because of the tone, because I was 8 years old and probably shouldn't have been there. All about.
It's a big
but a lot of 8-year-olds wouldn't take it in. Is the thing, mate. A lot of kids, they take into the theatre or whatever, and they. Well, I guess these days play on their phone, but read
or
a book
absorb the spectacle rather than take the story.
Or just don't really get affected by it. Not every 8-year-old would react like that.
But then when you have, I think, just the atmosphere that you grow up in as well. My mum was always brilliant with me and my sister, with taking us to classes and encouraging us. And my dad was a graphic designer. Now you go and see Evita for the first time, the original Hal Prince production, and the backdrop immediately is a graphic designer's dream. It's this beautiful sort of mural of sort of power. It goes from the bottom, obviously, where you got the peasants, and then goes up to the top.
Yes.
Feudal pyramid, in fact.
No, indeed, and it just blew me away. And 8-year-old seeing that, and then hearing the music and loving the music and all that sort of stuff. Inevitably, as your life goes on, you want to do something like that too.
Totally,
anyway,
well, it's the only world that makes sense, for me at least.
But then that's how we met. So we met on a course. Where you get sort of obliterated for doing 3 or 4 days' work outside of your normal job, thinking that you've presented something fairly decent, and then the teachers, the facilitators will find any weakness that they can. Yeah. And it was the greatest character building exercise for everyone on that course, actually. But anyway, we met each other.
We should mention the name of it. It was BML, Book, Music and Lyrics.
And you recommend it?
But we both highly recommend it, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the facilitators on there are all professionals.
They're all brilliant, yeah.
And when you have a good piece of work and you get through, and sometimes it's the piece of work that you don't think is the greatest, they'll see and they'll tell you why. And they'll explain, and it's through the explanation that you realise where you made a mistake or you did well.
Explanatory dramaturgy.
Exactly. I mean, for me, having sort of been incredibly lucky to do my dream first job of touring the world and presenting music in a group, to then go into an environment like that, I was frightened the first day. I remember that much. I couldn't even get through my composition. I just almost broke down at the piano and just went, I've never been so frightened in my life. All of you were looking at me.
Even though you'd performed in front of thousands of people in stadiums and things like that. Amazing. That is amazing. So when you met on this course 3 or 4 years ago, And I know that you saw a very early version of the Quentin Dentin Show in 2015 in Kingston.
Yes.
I saw the slightly later version of it in Edinburgh that same year.
Couple months later,
That's exactly right. So we jumped on at a similar point, but obviously you much more profoundly. You and Henry had already sort of formed a friendship. So
yeah.
I think we'd formed a working relationship. We became friends a little while later.
It took
a while for us to sort of really trust each other, I think.
Yeah, it was definitely...
But we'd been working together for... Actually, we hadn't started doing our thing yet.
Well, let me just think chronologically. So, before I got to book music and lyrics, I'd already done about a year's worth of development on a show which I had no idea where it was really going to go, and I hadn't fully formed a story, for God's sake, but I had loads of great motifs.
Yeah.
I thought, oh,
so it was coagulating.
That's pretty swell, yeah. Yes. And then I realised that I can't do this all on my own. It's actually, bearing in mind it's a sort of sung through piece. Just thought, this is ridiculous. I need to find someone as good as me, I think, and that shouldn't sound arrogant.
No.
You've got to find people as good as you to move forward harmoniously.
Yeah, you've got to be symbiotic and pitched at a similar level. If one person's madly better or worse, then it's going to act as an anchor or some kind of drain on the relationship, isn't it?
It is. I mean, things, the best scenarios in any business, in any walk of life, is when you have people as good as each other.
But doing slightly different things, bringing different things to collaboration.
Different opinions, all that sort of stuff. And that's where you form the trust. So, chronologically, I'd worked on this thing, then I'd gone to book music and lyrics, where you work with loads of different people. Yeah. And some of them are fantastic and work with you, some of them not quite right for you or whatever.
All human life is there.
Exactly. Yes. And then we worked together. We did a little piece on History Boys, and we just got each other straight away. It just made perfect sense, even though the song that we did was okay. I mean, but the relationship was already...
We knew exactly where each one of us was coming from. It was just like, oh, should we do this then? Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, let's do it that way. And it's like, often you try to work with people and you're in different worlds, you know?
Yeah.
In the same world.
Not just different worlds professionally, but different worlds in ways of seeing the world as
that's
well.
What I mean.
You do need some...
Paul and I are very...
There's a Venn diagram of personality.
Different in a lot of ways, but we have the same vision of things, I think.
Yeah. Vision, scale and immediacy are the core things, I think.
We have the same vision of entertainment.
Yeah. Very much so, yeah. I mean, my attention span is tiny.
Well, goodbye then.
And that works it's always seemed to work in my favour, in the fact that I think people with a longer attention span don't seem to, they just end up writing stuff that waffles on.
Yeah.
And
lacks punch, perhaps.
Lacks punch, exactly. And I don't think people, especially in this day and age, have that time anyway.
No, I agree with that.
You want to be smacked in the face from the opening number and crack on. So anyway, chronologically, there I was, sort of met Henry, and I thought, this is interesting. I got the same feelings that I got when I started my band. Yeah. And I thought...
from the Quentin Dentin Show?
Or
just working with Henry? Just from Henry, yes.
And then I found out, whilst we started to sort of just chat about things and, maybe have a look at this, come and join me on this and whatever, Henry was working on this show called the Quentin Dentin Show. And so that's when I said, well, I'll go and check it out, And he was performing, he was...
It's a Dennis Waterman situation.
It really, sing the theme tune, write the theme tune. I'm surprised he didn't play every character. Actually,
I would have done.
How's your dancing?
It's not any better than it was then.
But that show, even because I saw, as I say, the Edinburgh version of the show just a little bit later, but it had punch. We've just been speaking about that. It had something that gripped me immediately, and I've loved it ever since in all its iterations as it gets better and better and better. But it has got something, and you see so many shows which are perfectly pleasant, but they don't always say, actually, this is the thing, this has got something. So it's quite difficult to work out tangibly what that is, of course. And I know that the last 3 years have been spent refining and defining that, I imagine, and that job is never going to finish.
I think it's because it means something, and it's very obvious to people that it means something. The question is, what does it mean?
Yes.
And I think what we've been doing, and what hopefully we will continue to do together on the Quentin Show, is define exactly what it means.
Which brings us, I think, quite nicely to the album, because, and I've got, there's no right or wrong answers to these questions, but I would like to know, as a first position, how the two of you got to a view on what you needed the album to do, what you wanted the album to do, and how it ought to do it. It's the sort of directorial decisions, because, in traditional senses, there are several ways of recording an original cast album. There is a live version, which I always think is slightly lacking, to be brutal, because what that makes is a historic record, fine, but it's backwards looking, not forwards looking. It's not something you can go to again and again and be engaged with. What you're doing is sort of one step removed, passively enjoying a previous example. There's I'm going to use the Dolly Cart as a good example, because Dolly Cart have been recording versions of Gilbert and Sullivan for 100 odd years. They are, if you like, the daddies of how to do recording of albums, and they've done it in different ways. But from the sort of 60s and 70s in the hi-fi era, for want of a better phrase, they would give you the dialogue as well as the entire score. So what you were listening to is a radio version, essentially, of the story, which is a nice and engaging way of doing it. But not everyone wants the dialogue in a score. That's not always the best way of presenting or giving the feeling of a show, shall we say. Then there are abridged versions. There are lots of different ways of doing it. Sometimes it's just a plain recording. You could have chosen to do a recording of what was presented to the public in 2017 in the live version, not as a live recording, but a studio version of that. But you've not chosen to do that. So, and we'll talk about what you have chosen to do in a minute. But how did you come to that decision? Did you actually have a tangible conversation about it?
Yeah, we did. I
suppose you must have.
Well, Henry and I, up until the point I've been doing a lot of mixing, we're working 4 days a week. So we
talk about everything.
We talk about everything, meaning of life, all that sort of stuff. So
what is the meaning of life?
Well, balance.
Oh, right, very good.
And love.
That's the quickest response I've ever had to that question.
Yeah, good one.
I'm writing that down. Carry on, please.
So, we talk about everything, and the most important thing when it comes to anything that we work on is you have to have a good opinion. No one wants to work with someone who hasn't got an opinion. It just doesn't work. And Henry was brilliant, because he sort of said, well, Paul, if we're going to work on this, I want you to do what you think, because I've been working on this thing for so long. I don't think I can tell, and I can tell you like bits in the second one that you didn't like in the third one, and bits in the first one, etc. And I was brutally honest, wasn't I?
Yeah, and that's what it needed. Paul was kind of completely brutal, as you say, but in an extremely constructive way, because he doesn't just tear things down. He offers ways to make them better.
Good criticism is a gift.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't have to accept it,
and
but it makes you think.
I think the thing about us is that we always are able to come up with a better alternative. Yeah. We spend a lot of time coming up with ideas and tearing them down, but what's great about this album is I think that Paul has sort of solved a lot of problems in the music.
This is a tangent, but are you aware of the Warner Brothers Yes sessions?
No.
Great Warner Brothers cartoons, the Bugs Bunnies, the Daffy Ducks of the 40s, 50s and 60s with Chuck Jones and people like that.
Yeah.
What they used to do is, obviously they storyboarded it because they're artists and that's how they did it, but then they would bring everyone into a room in their team and they would have something called the Yes session. And what that involved was that anyone could say that I don't think that's working, but they had to have a better idea.
Yes.
So you could only build up. You couldn't knock down.
Exactly.
But I thought that's a really positive way, encapsulating, those are rules in that sense. You've sort of described that just now, actually, that in a way that it wasn't criticism, it was constructive, it was build up, it was pull it up by its bootstraps kind of criticism.
Well, some people will just knock you down and then walk away, won't they?
Well, they will, yeah. I think what I was going to say is that we had a wider discussion than just the album.
Yeah.
I think it was a case of, for me, well, if I'm going to get on board at this point, this is what I really think, and this is where I really think the whole thing beyond the album should go.
Yeah.
And so that was where we had
Quentin Dentin train, if you like.
Absolutely. And it was kind of, it was over a few beers down the Alice House, in Kilburn, and just sort of sitting there and just going, okay, right, this is where, I think it is. What do you think? Can we fashion something for the future of this thing? And also, will the album fit in that as almost a precursor?
Yeah.
And that's where we ended up, really.
So would it be fair to say that this is, if you like, a new production of the Quentin Dentin Show? I'm not talking theatrically, I'm just talking about in the iterations we're getting. It's new.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's how it feels to me, by the way.
The music has been reimagined, brought to life, really, and a whole new sheen and atmosphere is present on this album that has never been present before, a kind of glossiness that I feel like is ridiculous that we never achieved before, because in a way that's what the story is about. It's about glossy presentation of celebrity and of wish fulfillment, And for the first time, I think we have a production of these songs and a realisation of these songs that sound like what they're about. And,
well, it feels very, very now. I mean, obviously, I'm a middle-aged man, and there's nothing I can do about that. But it sounds to my ear very contemporary indeed, but in an entirely accessible way. By which I mean, I love this show, and therefore I love everything in it. But I probably wouldn't be listening to this kind of music elsewhere. Although if it did actually sound more like the Quentin Dentin Show, I probably would. So I know that's a cyclical argument, but it sounds contemporary. It's got a lovely toothiness about it, and edge and sharpness as well, which I also consider the Quentin character himself sort of displays. You know, that suit alone is sharp. Yeah. That sharpness is in the lyrics, in the thoughts behind it, and in the arrangement of the production. It's crisp as well. Yeah. I'm using terms which I'm not a musically minded person. I'm more a lyric. I'm not the lyrics into the market.
That's exactly right.
But I'm enjoying it, and these are the words that spring to my mind when I've been listening to it. How much chopping and changing have you had to do? If we take this as a new production, what are the differences between 2017 and 2018? Have any of the songs gone? I know they've been. Yeah. The feel is different. What's in, what's out?
Well, first and foremost, let's start slightly at the beginning. So,
it's been
one of the key decisions was no talking, really.
Yeah, no dialogue.
I just was like, do I really want to hear a script that we might even change in the future? Yeah. Even some of the characters might change.
Well, and that has turned out to be the case. So,
the key ingredient for me, beyond the music, beyond everything, is it's called the Quentin Dentin Show. I want it to be about him.
And it's always wrestled with that slightly, hasn't it? Because this is no criticism, but he's, you know, it's presented as his story at the beginning, and then he's brought in with the couple, and then it becomes about him again.
Yeah.
And he is a entrancing character in his own right. He's a weird character. He's a strange character. He's, you know, there's a whole questionable set of morals there. But he's. We've actually discussed this elsewhere, and other people have said this. You know, that you feel sorry for him. There is a poignancy in the character, which allows an audience to have empathy for this slightly. Well, I say slightly. This tremendously odd, weird man.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's a good focusing element.
This is the thing now. You know, Henry's obviously created this world. And, you know, it's a very angular world, isn't it? And he's a very interesting character and a very unique character. And that was one of the things that drew me to when I saw the first iteration in Kingston. And I know it was you in a gold suit and all that stuff, wings and whatever. But it was
just standard evening wear.
Yeah, just you just walked on stage off the street.
Yeah,
but,
pretty much. Yeah.
But yeah, no. There was a unique quality about that which was interesting, and not everyone around me saw it, and they thought I was nuts. And I said, no, there's something in this. There's something in this. So that's where we started, and we discussed that for a while, didn't we?
Yeah. By the way, the word angular is such an interesting one, but I think completely accurate.
Yeah, it's
people use it to talk about music, don't they?
Yeah, it's sharp and angular, and you mentioned about the sort of use of, and this comes from mainly, I would say, from Henry's composition on a couple of tunes, thinking of numbers and stuff like that, with the synthesizers that we used. I mean, we just went into an array of synthesizers to play with because it felt modern and it felt retro, and that's fine by me.
Yeah, it's fine by me, as it turns out.
Yeah, and it just worked for that. And so we went about working with those parameters as opposed to let's just replicate the show, because what was most important for me was taking a show that I'd seen with 30 people in the audience into a world, and everybody getting a chance to hear it. That was more interesting because there's a life for that forever now. Yeah. And it may only be the beginning, and people might cite that as, that was album Mark 1 or whatever, and then we take it a hell of a lot further, which
more songs,
we would anticipate will be the process that we're going to go down.
Can I jump in and say one thing? Of course. I think you asked 10 minutes ago, what was the approach that we took? Was it a live album or a with the dialogue radio play thing? And I think what we've done is approach this recording as a pop album. Yes. And that's its greatest strength, I think, almost, is the fact that as a listening experience, it's like a sort of 35-minute party album that you want to put on again when you've heard it. It's not bogging you down or asking you to kind of try to remember a story or try to feel out what's happening or sit through music that would be more interesting if you're looking at something on stage, because everything that would have been like that we just cut. Paul was just like, no, I'm bored.
But you can still feed the story into it. Like I know the story from the
I
2017
think
production.
the story comes across.
If you know the story, it's there.
Yeah.
I'd love to, because obviously I can't also say if I didn't know the story, could I pick it up? But there's very clearly narrative points being offered you all the way through it. But you're absolutely right. But it comes across as a pop album in its own right first. And is also a musical theatre cast recording.
But that's the greatest thing that Paul brought to it, or one of them, because that gives it crossover appeal. That means, like he just said, that, you know, perhaps someone who isn't in our world of liking this sort of thing can pick it up and listen to it and get into it.
It's a soundscape, in a way, that you developed. We've been talking about the Quentin Dentin world. I'm assuming that you're both very happy with the sound that you've created here together, because that now means that there's almost a musical context for that world. There always was through the songs and the lyrics anyway, but it's a very distinct world through the arrangements. I'm not sure where I'm going with this, apart from the fact that actually soundscaping is really, when done well, is invisible and does need to be shown to be there. You know, in conversation, you know, even simple things like where one song immediately goes into another song. There are several tracks, if you like, which are dual tracks almost. Song A and song B feed into one. So if you were seeing them on stage, you might think they were one piece. Listening on the album, you can choose to go back, or you listen to it on shuffle or random or whatever. You're going to get it in a different order. Those are directorial choices as well, aren't they? I mean, you've chosen to break them up.
Well, actually, both of those ones were written like that. But I mean,
it's a representation.
But yes, they those are directorial choices, and beyond that, you know, the way that things like numbers goes into the blame game, pretty much. That's a directorial choice.
Very true. I think that you know, some of them did pre-exist. Having said that, before the Quentin Dentin TV show, we decided.
Which is a song.
We decided in the mastering room that actually the bit at the beginning, the tag at the beginning, should be its own song. It just felt.
That's right.
It felt like a right decision.
Quentin's poignant moment.
Yeah.
And then I've just thought of some more directorial decisions he made, like the reprise at the end of Take Your Medicine and at the end of All Together Now. Those were both your shout, and they are, you know, brilliant. Particularly the ending of All Together Now. That sort of rounds out the whole album.
Yeah, I mean,
it does.
Take Your Medicine is my favourite song in the show, because I really played with it, because it felt like it could be played with a little bit. It's got punky edge and it's just in your face. I mean, All Together Now, I went all out on that one. I mean, for me, that was one of the songs that needed the most work, actually.
So simplistic.
It's so simplistic, and I worried that if it was just a building block song, is that enough? And I didn't think it was. And so there's always, if you really analyse it, there's always something new every 4 bars coming in.
Well, this is one of the things I think is actually true of almost all the songs in the show. You know, we're not talking AABA here. We are talking interesting, quirky, travelling songs, which even when bits are sort of reprised, or you think, oh, that's the bit we heard earlier on, you're not actually hearing that. There's a new arrangement slant, there's a new lyric, there's new something or other about it. It feels like a bowl of popping candy, if that makes, because it's a party in my mouth and everyone's invited. Or in my ears, perhaps, is a better way of phrasing it in this. But also, that's a sign of wonderful non-laziness, it's about a dynamic, even the tempi change in songs. And also, you don't necessarily notice it unless you're listening out for it. So there's all this lovely layering, and this is how shall I'm going to say something that sounds dreadful. There is a view that pop is a simplistic form of music. I'm not saying it's widely held, but some people hold that view. This is a pop album. This is a tremendously sophisticated album. It's a tremendously clever, layered set of songs being presented to me as the public. Not just me, obviously. It's pretending to be a buffet, but it's a banquet.
But then this show is really about mental health, and yet it's presented as a fun, wacky game show. So I think both things hang up with each other. You know what you just mentioned, and that exactly.
It's like a good poem. It works on different levels.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can take what you want from it, right?
Absolutely. The whole idea of the show and the album is that it's on the surface, it's just a totally kind of accessible, enjoyable experience, and then if you want to dig deeper and you want to analyse it, then there's meat under there.
There's this amazing emotional duality to it as well, though, because as you say, there's the fun, wacky, quirky, frothy, take it if you want it that way kind of overlay, which hides, both in the show and in the album, the anger. Anger is not missing from this. It is so built in that actually it's not a show about being angry, it's there if you want it. So we're back to these layers again. I think.
It's an angry premise, but I mean, you know, what can you do? It's
modern society demands
it's almost like the setup is. Yeah, the setup encapsulates that frustration with everything, and then from there it's just like it's implicit, isn't it? So it's just a show about a funny robot and stuff. You know, it's
but there's so much more than that. But it can be.
Yeah.
So I think that's fantastic. Shall we talk about one or two of the tracks, if you're agreeable? Yeah. But even the first track is an odd track because it's not a melody per se, it's a setup track, it's a context track. It's almost a throwaway, but once again, it's not a throwaway if you spend any time listening to it. You know, even the last line on it, "Why aren't you being your best?" is setting up the, if you like, the mantra that Quentin's going to be trying to force people into and work under and against and through in the later show across the album as well. But it's a collage. You know, how did you piece that together? I know it's a replication of, not a replication of, but it's the same concept as we saw in the stage play. It starts with a radio in that sense.
Well, some of them were lines that were in the script. Some of them were new lines.
Let's see your beach body.
Yeah. Paul,
that's you, isn't it, Henry?
That's me. Paul does some of them. Paul says the thing about your ugly brain.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know about you, but I think we talked about like the beginning of Diamond Dogs by Bowie and like a lot, and El Dorado by Electric Light Orchestra. That's another one that begins with like a funny kind of poem on the intro. And it's, I guess it's a thing they did on albums in the 70s.
It's a welcome
mat. It
just sets the scene, It just sets the scene. I mean, originally we were deciding, should this even be there at all? Again, it was a mastering decision. The moment that we heard the whole thing put together with Simon Gibson mastering, I think we said, can we chuck that at the front and just see how that fits? And it just worked wonderfully. It sets the scene, and then the next song flows in beautifully.
But also, it's you know, even briefly, because it's essentially a sort of sounds to me like a shortwave radio changing channel. Little bits of dialogue or music come through, which obviously all play off later on. But even down to the na 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 na, just briefly quoted, and of course that comes up at least twice in the album. So you know that's once it's a golden thread being drawn through your tapestry of delight.
Something in the air is calling my name, tells me to prepare a market campaign. My job, I know, perform the show.
And then we go into the Quentin manifesto song almost. You know, this is...
his personal manifesto. Yeah.
And what, you know, the deal that is being offered, but the very first thing we hear is a kind of sirens, and that's a sort of sense of warning. That's very good. I like that. And then there's, once again, this isn't going to be the right phrase, but it was an entrancing backing and had a sense of trance in it. Now I don't really know what trance music is, but there was something about the backing to it which made me relax and comfortable, if that makes sense. It was a warm, comfortable, but not in a cosy kind of a way. I'm struggling for the words here. It's not cosy, but it is comfort-making. And then the lyrics come on, and Luke, in his case, is singing as Quentin Dentin, and we hear what he's after and what he wants. But it's still such a catchy tune as well.
I think it's comforting because it sounds so. I mean, the drums are like really punchy and like it's just like it sounds right. You know, I think that's, and it's upbeat and like it's just immediately kind of engaging. And of course you compare that to how it used to begin the song. You know, it's completely different drum pattern, completely different.
It's just a different energy, wasn't it?
Very different energy, different tempo, and it had a complicated guitar part instead of those little synths going doo 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 doo, and you know and no sirens. So those are in that 8 bars, 4 major changes Paul made.
It was. Again, I'm a very, very visual person. We both are.
Which seems odd, doesn't it, when we're talking about an album? But
well, yeah, but
Paul draws a lot of pictures.
I have to draw pictures, and I have to see what it looks like on stage in my mind.
So you're always making that reference back, which is very interesting, actually.
Always. Yes. And we discuss this at length. Every decision is discussed at length, usually over several coffees.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Irish coffee?
Yeah. Well, this is it. Only on Fridays.
Yes.
But it has to feel right. And again, so with the radio interruption moving into this, the scene has to be set. You have to be engaged as a listener. Otherwise, you turn off the album, don't you? And that's not what we want. We want complete engagement for 35 minutes, if possible.
And the song travels, and it helps us as an audience travel with it, because it very quickly, because you've added a sort of crowd sound, sort of it starts off intimately with Quentin talking to me and these sort of trancey, no better term, backing, and then we get the I am a performer in a pop venue, in a stadium, in an enormous venue, and you can hear people screaming and shouting it's suddenly you the audience, me the listener, am drawn with the character as he moves into that. That's quite a trick in one song.
Well, it's your classic sort of Sgt. Pepper, Benny and the Jets situation. And that's literally where it lent on. I think it's just a quicker song, isn't it, really? It's just got that energy, and he's an engaging character, so let's give him a chance, you know.
And of course but you are doing things which you cannot do on stage. The very last bit of that song is almost, and once again, forgive me for not using the right terms, but it sounds like the tape winding down.
That's exactly
exactly.
Yeah, you couldn't do that with his voice, I guess.
Unless it looked really cool.
No, I mean, but that's exactly the thing. I think, again, that was a production decision, and something which we continue to do with all our work, which is go, well, we'll work that out when it comes to actually going on.
But this is an album.
And we can do what we want when we want, and if we want an orchestra of 100 people, we can.
And doctored vocal effects.
And you make things abrupt as well. There's lots of abrupt endings or fake abrupt endings and things like that. You know, but these work theatrically as well as make for a compelling sound and a compelling listen. So, that first number, that first sung number, is already doing lots of different things. In terms of plot as well as in terms of the audioscape, the soundscape. Just briefly talk about the next one then, Who's That Man? I've said before to you, Henry, off the record, I think, but it has the sense of an English folk song. This one of your
very much,
one of your joys is, I think, so many of your different songs, not in a pastiche, but you are able to bring in and incorporate and interpolate lots of different styles. So there are different songs, there's going to be a song later on, and you can guess which one I'm going to be talking about, but I'm going to describe it as the 50s song.
Oh, yeah.
The Blame Game. And this is the folk song, if you like. And, Altogether Now is a kind of Beatlesque number. It certainly lulls me into thinking that, at least, certainly at the beginning.
I think Altogether Now is a kind of fusion of, there's a track called Timing Exercise by Devo, which is a kind of all these synth loops kind of coming in and this thing building up in 7/8. And so it's partly that, and actually partly English folk music. I remember when I was a chorister, one of my favourite songs to sing was this one that went... Tomorrow will be my dancing day. I would my true love did so shine. Do you know what I mean? It's
know the song.
It's not in a 4/4 thing. So I guess it does have a bit of that.
I was gonna. My 2 cents was Madness.
With
their version of It Must Be Love. That was what I had in my head.
It changes up, doesn't it? It goes
not even the time signature, just the feel of the track. Less Beatles. I mean, the Beatles in the chorus, yes, but in the verses, I just thought. I forget who was the original guy. It was a Postman. We used to play at the end of our gigs, actually, that song by the original guy. Just the feel of it.
Totally. No, I get what you mean with all of those kind of little things kind of coming in for one hit or whatever.
Just up on the piano.
But we'll get onto that song in a minute, though, because it has a very different function from the rest of the score in some sense. As
Wait, are we not talking about
Altogether Now?
I thought we were talking about Who's That Man? Sorry.
Well, we've been talking about both.
Ah, right. So you were talking about
Altogether
Gotcha.
Now.
Yeah, no, that
which is why you can't make
sense.
Madness meet the folk song. But
got you.
No. Who's That Man? Yeah, folky.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's sort of Jethro Tull as well.
Very much.
Yeah.
And I will just throw away. There's some beautiful, lovely lyrical plays. I mean, they were in the show last year. This song was in the show last year. I think new for last year, actually. But I love the almost homonym usage of happy and happen.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's simple, but actually really very effective.
That's the best bit of the song, I think.
Well, also, it's
new little synth bubble.
But that bit's also quite staccato, isn't it, as well? It's a folk song, and it has that kind of sort of historic sense to it, but also it then does something that's totally modern, both in the lyric, both in the arrangement, both in the sense of and once again, the tempi, I'm using the word plural, I hope correctly, changes all the way through it. It sounds like a really complicated song to sing. If you're thinking about the mechanics of singing it, it sounds like a really simple song to hear.
Well, it was a difficult song to record. It was the second song we recorded, and I remember Paul was like, they're not all going to be like this.
Yeah, we tempo mapped absolutely every single song on this. I wanted to be
that must have been breaking the atom, that one.
It was.
Oh my God.
It was. I didn't just want to press play and let the band play. You know, the songs were too. They needed to be on the money, and so programming was a big deal. Yeah. Programming was a big deal on
and that's
this,
another
and
part of modern sound as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some might say slightly clinical thing about that, but actually I disagree. I just think it locks it in.
I was going to say the alternative way of interpreting clinical is non-sloppy. You know, and it's
absolutely,
not sloppy.
No.
This is precise, and all the better for it.
Yeah.
You know, and everything comes through because of the clarity.
Yeah.
You know, we want clarity, we want transparency, we want vision. I got all of that. These are my notes I wrote. The next song is Lemons, which is a classic from the Quentin Dentin catalogue, shall we say. Very funny, a longer song usually. I've written slightly parpy background. Once again, the soundscape is exactly fitting and exactly right and entirely unexpected to me as the kind of listener I am. And I quite like parpiness, for want of a better. Later on, there's a song that's quite splodgy.
Good.
Yeah, so
If I can jump in and say something,
Go for it.
I think, and then that'll lead on to you. I think what's interesting about this song to a listener like yourself, Thos, is that it's a classic Gilbert and Sullivan number that has been that we've created a backing for that's made entirely out of synths, like arpeggiators.
It's what they'd be doing now.
Yeah, it is. It might well be what they would be doing now, but it's quite unique in that sense. Like it reminds me a little bit of the 70s production of Pirates in New York, where they put a lot of synths in the score. That's what I think is really interesting about this track, is that it's a very old school kind of Victorian number with this glittering synthesized backing track.
And it builds up to a sort of lyrically, it builds up to an ending which feels exactly right, and yet you don't know it's coming until the very last sort of couplet, really, which is Quentin is making you lunch.
Yeah.
And it has a kind of ascending sense. You know, the song it's come to its end, and it's going to build up through an ascending sound up to its sort of punchline, and then there's a tiny little sort of guitar payoff, if you like. Yeah, I thank you. That kind of thing. But those little moments are beautiful as well. That's someone who knows how to wear jewellery rather than wearing bling. That's the difference there. If you get my, it's beautifully adorned, and it doesn't drag itself down in any way.
Well, what Paul's so good at is reduction and taking things out so that you can hear other things. You know, and like you're great at, you know, like when it was performed last year, basically. You know, a lot of it's just like all the instrumentalists all the time in a lot of places, which is just something you do without thinking. And you know, Paul was able to kind of pull these things apart and say, okay, no, we'll take the guitar out here, we'll take, you know, the drums out here, and we'll just have that little guitar. We'll just be the only one doing the button. And that's just been so.
Less is more sometimes. Yeah.
Well, a lot of this came in the mixing, so it took maybe 2 months to record and then 4 months to mix. I mean, I really.
You were recording this last year, I think, actually, wasn't it? Prior to Christmas, that kind of period.
Yeah.
That's right.
And there was a lot of me just sitting in a room piecing this thing together and playing with it, and just, you know, once I had the ingredients, it was let's make the cake.
Well, the love comes out, if I may say.
Well, I'm delighted. I mean,
really
that's
does.
that means a lot.
Attention to detail.
But there are sort of let's move on to Holiday, which is the next number, which is Nat's number, and it's her I Want song, although it's an I don't really know what I want song. Well, it is, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
But what's beautiful about that was it's the nearest to a spoof song in the whole thing, but I don't mean spoof, pastiche maybe is the better thing, because it reminded me of everything from Oma Polona Blanca, I think it is, from the 1970s, to Sera Vida A, all these sort of holiday numbers that sort of holiday anthemy things that you see on television, that you hear on the radio all the time, you know, for 3 months. From the moment someone digs out Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles, you know that we're going to get 3 months of sunny weather this year as it happens, and all the music will match it. And I just love the fact that it's even I, who doesn't listen to that kind of music, you know, I really thought, this is the holiday anthem song. And it also, you know, it's actually sets itself up, doesn't not stay too long. It's not a long song. No. It shouldn't be a long song. You know, it's exactly right, which takes us back, and takes us back to a point you were making earlier about, I think, Henry, you said that, Paul, you bring a sense of pace to songs, but presumably also pace is another way, or at least works symbiotically with the narrative profile,
Yeah.
such as there is a narrative profile, and I think there is in this. I mean,
But pace on an album is,
Yeah.
is different
How do you do
again
it?
from the narrative profile, and I think that's a question of the ear, and that's what Paul has. You know, I mean, he understands when, how long these things can run, how long these things should run on. Yeah.
Well, there's a simple answer to this. When I was in a band for 9 years, is that we always used to say, how short can we make it?
Oh,
Because
really?
if it's short, then people want to put it back on again.
I see the point.
And
Yeah.
it works every time.
Ooh.
You
Well, the
know?
album does not outstay its welcome.
No.
I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. I wish it had 10 more songs on it.
That's
but
exactly
that's
what we were
perfect.
going
Oh, well.
for, you know.
Well, I'm happy to be your guinea pig. But yeah, pace is really important, and it sails through. Nothing drags. You can't hear the scuffing of a soul in here. And this song, I think, is the one that exemplifies that. Biff, bash, bosh.
Yeah.
It does what it says. It gets you laughing. It makes its point. Then
Mm-hmm.
goes away, and we're into something else. And the something else we're into is the Friend Zone, which is a lovely song. You've got the two friends who are now singing in a way that they weren't 3 years ago.
Yes.
And they sing. I mean, we've discussed this before, Henry. But there's that kind of sort of Seussian character, Minion character, or characters to them. But they are so sort of childish and childlike, yet that sinister child. The first feeling when I listened to that song on this album, funnily enough, is those adverts that you used to get on television late at night, just after midnight, on Channel 4. It would be lots of young people dancing in what looks like a dreadful old studio around the back of Television Centre, and a voiceover saying, if you're looking for party fun, why not use this telephone number now? It's that kind of forced party fun, which of course is exactly what thematically the song is playing.
Yeah.
That's what I thought, I could visualise this as a television advertisement. And then of course all your lyrical flourishes about actually, I'm going to be your friend, don't make us hurt you.
Yeah.
There's all the threats, the sinister, unlike friendship you could die kind of thing,
That's a Spice Girls reference.
Oh, is it?
Unlike
well-
friendship, your life, friendship never ends.
Oh, you see, that did miss me.
Yeah,
I missed
yeah.
that one
It's a
completely.
pretty deep
That's
cut.
great.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, but how wonderful there are all these levels still to find, and different people will pick up. I'm going to change the subject completely, but I've just come back from Edinburgh as we're recording this, and there was a fantastic show up there called Elizabethan, where a chap was doing a one-man show, and he was playing Tudor music from 1580 to 1620, so Jacobean as well, seriously, to illustrate the original wit, and he was doing it absolutely perfectly. But he had a sort of comedy one-man show about an Elizabethan who died of love, and he was a tremendously intelligent man, as indeed you both are, and he was throwing references left, right and centre for everyone. There was a bit of Proust, there was a bit of Rousseau, but then for other people he also quoted I'm a Barbie girl. There was something for everyone, and that's what I like about this. There's something for everyone if you can find it.
I hope so.
Slightly higher than a Barbie girl, but Spice Girls, it's all I make no comment.
That's a pretty cool song, Barbie Girl by that.
Oh, it's a great song.
Well, it was instantly recognisable, even in Tudor form.
Yeah.
And some of the backing here is wonderful again. Well, by backing, I mean some of your arrangements. That's the term I would have to use for it. There's that kind of, it's all ersatz fun being demonstrated in this song, and you've got a kind of carousel style downward. It's not that, but you know what I mean.
That's the extra synth part.
Yeah,
It's
that's
a
right.
kind of fairgroundy feel to it, which sort of adds to that kind of you will have fun.
Yes.
It's one of my favourite songs on the album, actually, because it's really so angular, so quirky. It sort of, to me, sums up the whole style of what we're trying to do.
The ethos stems from there in both
Very
directions.
much so, yeah.
It's a great song, and it's a great.
You got the robot voices as well, which is
Always fun.
obviously a nice little extra element that obviously we didn't. Well, you guys
We
didn't
weren't
do
able
in
to do, yeah, absolutely.
but we'll maybe
Can
be
you do
present.
can you do that live?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
a
yeah,
ring
very
or
much
something?
so.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
And then we move into people like you immediately. Once again, it's one of
Mhm.
those ones that's sort of linked.
Yeah, I think that was always the
It was
case,
always
wasn't
the
it?
case,
Yeah, it was
yeah.
always the case.
This is the one you and I think Henry have discussed this before. Once again, I love your lyrics because they're so teeming with meaning.
Thank you.
He spends there's the double meaning of making people like
Yeah.
you, the enforcement as well as
Mm.
the self-help handbook
Sure,
method
yeah.
that's all option available, and then the business about shilling your opinions, and people take it as an insult. No one wants to be quizzed, and of course what Quentin's been doing throughout the show up to that point is forcing his opinions on other people, shilling his wares, and making being all the things he's criticising other people for.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
I think that's the success of that song is the fact that every line undercuts itself almost exactly, or undercuts the character, or the character is undercutting his own meaning. I also like the line, "Rhyming makes it sound true," which of course tells us enough about
that's
shallow
that's
modern
a good
society.
one. That's a Gilbert and Sullivan, isn't it? What is it? Tosh can fool you when it rhymes. First forsooth hides the truth. From Pinafore. But that's another cracking arrangement on that song. That's really what I listen to. I listen to all the claps and the and the little marimba. There's so much going on in that one.
And you were talking about pace earlier. There's also a sort of when I say aspirational, I mean aspirational. Well, I suppose aspirational in the sense that Quentin is offering some kind of aspiration, but I actually mean breathing aspirational. The last trio, the everybody wants the same thing, everybody gets the same thing, everyone is the same thing. And that's a beautiful trio in terms of meaning, but it's sung so throwaway, so quickly, so kind of. But actually, you could almost miss it. Yeah. That's what I like about it. Nat, who's duetting with Quentin here, is sort of being rushed through.
I think that's the idea.
Truth.
That she's singing
missing
it. She's having such a good time that she's missing the actual implication of what she's been being made to agree to. Yeah.
Now the next two songs are interesting because they're coupled together. So this is Too Weak to Refuse and the Quentin Dentin TV show, which we were talking about already. I like the fact they're fused, but what it also does is we were talking about pace and profile. It's the short Quentin's moment of self-doubt. So suddenly, the emotional pace of the show, as well as the tempo, if you like, the clicks and the beats, has suddenly really slowed down as well. And that's really important, isn't it? It's about the middle of the album.
Well, I think this was another wonderful call that Paul made to...
a Paul call?
This was a Paul call, again, which was to not... last year in the production, that was all arranged with the band and with drums and with guitar, and Paul just stripped all of that out, and it's just keyboards and that bit, and as well as providing a sort of sonic break, for your ears, it also, describes the kind of the naivety of Quentin that underpins all of his bombast. He's just like a little child who doesn't know what he's doing. And it's so sound-wise and also character-wise, I think that's a really brilliant change that I definitely want to keep. Just the way that everything drops out.
Well, I think also we had Katie Ray. She was brought in, and
incredible vocalist.
Yeah, yes. And I just think it was again a mixing decision where it was sort of like, well, let's see what she's got to say. Yeah. New character, different voice, and
what she bringing to the table. Yes.
Add a bit of reverb here and there and see what happens.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because on the Too Weak to Refuse, we're almost, as a listener, we're given a sense that it is Quentin's internal monologue, because it's done on a piano, which sort of adds poignancy, but you've tempered that piano some way electronically. I've written, in a very non-sophisticated way, wobbly flange piano.
That's right, that's exactly
yes, of course, yeah. I'm
not
remembering all of this
as
we're speaking about. I'm just like, because I haven't heard it for a few weeks.
I remember how that was just like we pressed the scroll wheel on the piano and it just went like that.
I think so, yeah. Either that or you accidentally lent
on it. Yeah, exactly.
Or Sparky's magic piano turned up with his Sonovox, yes.
But another thing of whilst we're talking about detail, sometimes happy accidents, like let's say you did lean on something or I pressed the wrong button or whatever, sometimes that is what makes something awesome as well.
Well, that's how penicillin was discovered, so well done. Yeah. but you're right, you've got sometimes you can accidentally fall out of your own envelopes even when you're pushing against the edge of it, can't you?
Yeah.
Was there any example of that particularly that you can remember, or are you just saying that is the kind of thing that
can happen? Well, it's just in general. I mean, I just think in recording, from my experience throughout, maybe certainly as a drummer, if I fluffed a fill and I went into the actual recording room and behind the mixing desk and listened and I went, oh God, that sounds great. I don't know how I could replicate that, but it sounds great. You keep it.
Of course you keep it. Happy accidents, serendipity. I mean, it's part of life. You might as well enjoy the good bits as well as the bad bits.
Absolutely.
Not every trip over means you land on a banana skin and fall flat in front of a cake.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about the QD TV show song sung by Goldie, the character. Because it's got so many musical references to it. I mean, I've written Bond theme meets I Will Survive. It's got sort of
Bond theme.
Bond
theme.
Yeah.
Oh right.
Certainly the opening sort of verse is all. I can imagine. The oddly lit dancing ladies on a Bond theme opening, and then it cuts to a kind of sort of diva-esque 70s, 80s.
Yeah. It's
Let me sing you my
sort of
anthem.
heard it on the grapevine is the kind of original reference point for that song, but it's grown into so much more.
Yeah, and it's such a rich song, that one, particularly compared with the delicacy, shall we say, of the poignancy of the Quentin reflective piece beforehand. So good contrast there as well, dramatically and musically.
We had a lot of trouble making it work, didn't we? Like making it feel right.
I think it was. We had a lot of debate about that song actually. I seem to recall about. I can't remember. I think it was just where it sat with the rest of the palette and how it could enhance it. What effects maybe to use. The real key issue that we were talking about is how to really make her without sounding slapstick like a microphone.
Yeah.
Because the idea for any listeners here is that a microphone ends up becoming a woman who sort of looks like a microphone somehow, and she dances this dancing microphone, however. And I seem to remember that the biggest crux of it was when I saw the third iteration of this. It didn't make too much sense visually, and I said, "Well, that I can't be doing that. Like, we've got to try at least. If this thing is a microphone, let's give it some feedback." And so we chucked in the line about, "I'm here to give you my feedback."
And you actually then play in some kind of ear palatable feedback.
That's right. Yeah, just
underline your joke.
And this kind of thing, and just hoping that, almost using your words earlier, like a radio play, that it would make some sense.
Well, ironically, this is a case where you de-theatricalised it, but you've narrativized it.
That's right.
He said really badly. So
no, that's exactly right. And I think approaching it like a recording has allowed the, also Katie Ray's performance. It can't be overstated how great she is on this song, and how she really is the puzzle piece that kind of makes it make sense. But also, beyond that, there are lots of lovely things that again mostly came from Paul about using the music, cutting bits out of the music to make it make sense. There's a great example of one, which is the line, "Don't you know success brings you happiness?" and then it just stops.
Yes.
There's a 2-beat stop, which is a lovely example of using the music to illustrate the lyric and have them working together. And
it pulls people up short, doesn't it?
And it pulls you up short, and it re-engages your interest.
Exactly.
And I think
punctuation.
Yeah, and I think that's what this whole album has, and I think that's what makes the material work in a way that maybe it didn't before. Because before you could just kind of let it wash over you.
I'm really enjoying this conversation, but the thing that's coming out thematically is texture.
Yeah.
But you've added together, you've really discovered, recut, rephrased, redressed, resupported and recontextualised where necessary. I'll stop now. But to give flavours, textures, and point. I said earlier things are on point. I can't say that enough. I think there's no. It's delightful to hear how you've had these conversations and how you're recollecting some of them. But it's that not taking anything for granted which makes this such a professional, splendid album. Yeah. And I think that's worth repeating.
Numbers, numbers, numbers tell me everything I ever need to know. Numbers can be high, and they are the best numbers.
All the numbers up, all the numbers down, 'cause numbers make the world go round. All the numbers up, all the numbers down, 'cause numbers make the world go round.
What's your favourite number? Is it 5?
Can we talk about numbers?
Of course.
Because Henry and I have spent many hours talking about numbers because it is my favourite number, and I can tell you Hannah Else's parents' favourite number because they told me. And these are my terms once again. I've written squidgy backing. Now we've spoken before about how the bum 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 kind of element, the 1-2 works, because it's worked in different ways in different songs. how did you come to the conclusion it needed to be the way it is in this version? Because this is, you know...
Do you know what? I think it was just a case of finding the envelope filter on a synth and just saying, that sounds pretty good. I think what Henry's got in the compositions is variety, but also I needed to make sure that sonically there was variety too. Interestingly, conversely, I think if we did it again, I might do it in a different way.
Push it a lot further.
We discussed it. This was a song where it could be done in many different ways. But I've got a clearer idea now since we've done this iteration of doing something else with it. But
next album, good.
Yeah, well, that's it. You know, this is the way we think. We are always trying to push forward. But Numbers, it's a quirky song. When I first saw Henry in the title role, the bit that got my shoulders laughing, so to speak, for the listeners.
Laughing shoulders?
Well, just because no one could see me doing it, so I'm laughing and my shoulders are going. Was the Numbers dance?
Yes.
Now,
stupid.
Sadly, obviously, we can't replicate that, so I decided to edit that shorter.
It is contracted. It's just
just because there's just nothing visual to see. However, that was a really funny. You know where you're at that point with that when you visually see that thing.
And I've written down here on the bit where the friends are saying the numbers up, the tempo becomes squashy. Because
it goes swung at the end.
Yes, that's exactly what it. Just to my ear, which I don't have the terms, but it's great to hear it do something slightly odd and different.
That was actually a little thing that was suggested by Archie Wolfman, who was the drummer on the 2017 production. He came up with that little detail, and it's a really nice one that we sort of have interpolated into the song with his permission. It's just another little game to play with the refrain, at the end, and another way that you could, you can switch it up and change it without adding any more meaning or actual.
But it keeps it interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
And funny enough, there is not in no way deliberately, but just a coincidental parallel with that. There's a Gershwin show called OK, and there's 2 or 3 different recordings of it from different periods, from the 50s. Funny enough, when there was a sort of pseudo Gershwin revival in America, but they changed it to make it Speech Marks contemporary, or they added new songs or reworked lyrics, so it's a bit of a bastardisation, to be honest. But there's a recording of that from the 50s, and then there's what you might call a correct version, which was done specifically in the 90s when they were trying to work their way through the whole canon of Gershwin. Unbelievable, not all Gershwin shows have been recorded even now. The money ran out. But there's a particular song which has a similar kind of tempo play, and in the Speech Marks proper version from the 1990s, it is done, and I don't know what the term is, but there's a kind of syncopation. There's a kind of
polyrhythm.
Yes, possibly that must be the way they do it, but it's done in a way that's unusual to the ear, but immediately appealing the moment you hear it. And the 1950s version does it bam, 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 and you think, no, you've missed the point, and the song doesn't fail as a result, but the recording fails.
So they played with a Gershwin number. They mucked about.
They mucked it up in the 50s and got it right in the 90s.
Oh,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I was going to say that's dangerous. I mean, it was written for a reason. When you're a composer and someone, if someone does something different with what you've written and they do it brilliantly, then great. But if you do that's just such a shame.
I must say the 50s recording is quite a flat-footed version of the Gershwin, but there's so few versions of the full complete Gershwin shows, you have to take what you can. Anyway, that's, by the way, forgive me, that is a sidestep, but it's interesting to me that that you can add interest just through a tiny little, or you can lose interest by not doing something.
Exactly.
Yeah. Maybe it's a negative that you've avoided.
Exactly.
I do love it though. Blame Game. As I said, the 1950s number. I was talking to Luke about this yesterday because, funnily enough, he starts singing in his Quentin voice, but then sort of becomes Quentin doing a 50s singer. And there's even a bit of Jerry Lee Lewis as a kind of sort of whoop, which I could not replicate, so I shan't. But you know what I'm talking about.
Again, that was sort of a choice where I'd heard it so many times, and I just thought, well, it needs to, this song is lending itself to a certain era. We'll put a bit of slap delay on the vocal. We let Luke play
slap
with
delay. That's an
slap delay.
I don't know the term,
it's
but it's
so sort of classic sort of 50s thing.
It's where it goes like, oh,
Yeah.
you know.
You know, so it's like 1, 2, 1, 2.
A mini
It's got that.
reverberation.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
And a lot of
right.
1950s music had that. And it just puts you in a nice place. And again, we're talking about variety here. Every little detail is to make sure that every song is not the same thing.
But this song itself is, I mean, I've described it as the 50s song, but it's got so many interpolations, there's new bits, and indeed some of the music sounds right. I've written game show jingles, which of course is entirely
really is.
appropriate because it's a game
Totally,
show.
yeah.
But you've got that kind of, wipe out, jingle-esque kind of feeling to it.
No, it's exactly it. It's just it's Jailhouse Rock basically, but it's that formatted as a game show. Yeah.
And I've written flavours of Monster Mash.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it does have a flavour of Monster Mash, doesn't it?
Yes, is the way I would reply to that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, with that song, the music is kind of as it was, but we just tarted it up a little bit. But it was all about the sound effects.
Yeah.
It was all about
Yeah.
the playing with all of that stuff. Whistle
And the pacing
noises
again,
and
because
claps
yeah,
and all
exactly,
of this
yeah.
kind of stuff, and pacing, but the song was already there.
Yeah.
You know, it was
But
just
you
one of those.
soundscaped it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was already there. It felt great.
And I must say, one of my favourite lyrics in the whole thing: 1 step, 2 step, do a little goose step.
Oh
You know,
yeah. It's one of the many fascist references.
Some are overt, some are tidier, but
Yeah.
I love it because it's just a throwaway. You know, it's part of the Quentin telling you how to do your 50s dance.
Exactly,
Do a little bellyache or whatever it is.
Do you know what? I didn't even pick up on that one
No,
at all. That's it. There's the Easter eggs, isn't
there
it?
you go.
Yeah.
There you go. There's something for everyone. All the fascists out there.
Oh God.
And I've written there's no underscore at the end.
Oh, what you mean where he's just
Yeah.
talking? Yeah, well, he's of course in the show that's where he falls over and he gets reprimanded.
Yeah.
So it's
His harsh truth.
yeah.
The next song is Life.
Mm.
Life is what you want it to be. And I've written, it starts off nice and quiet, which helps reflect the human anxiety. But there's an overlay of sort of static, as though you're listening to it on a
Yes.
on a 78 record.
Again, variety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, it has an interesting effect, because it's subtle enough to ignore if you want. But on the other hand, it's there. It's for me, what it seemed to do was to sort of help underpin that anxiety. I don't quite know how it did that.
The
But
sort of white noise hum
Yes.
kind of thing. Yeah.
I don't know if that's the sound of anxiety that we all have at the back of our heads, or
Do you know what? It was, sorry, no, you go for it.
I just
Let's talk
I think
anxiety.
it makes it. I think it makes it sound more fragile and more kind of more delicate.
Maybe that's the 78 thing going on, that if you think of
Yeah.
breakable records,
Yeah.
possibly.
I just wanted it to sound almost like an Etta James record or something that you pick out of a Californian vinyl store and
Exactly.
Oh, I
put
do
it
that
on your
all the
turntable
time.
and just go, okay, there we go. But
Or it's like Jacques Brel or something, or like some weird thing that you get on a 60s disc of like someone in a smoky cafe.
But also, with production techniques these days, we can play with this stuff. So it's about juxtaposition.
Yes, of course.
Once it pumps into the actual song, you've got clarity and you've got all of that, and he's talking about a slightly different part of that message. So
And it's all. I suppose the other thing is because there's a sense, isn't it, that you get that kind of pop stadium thing going on again.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, you're moving from recorded to live.
Very much
There's another
so.
sense of that. So,
But the thing is, you can actually
Transitions.
replicate all of this stuff on stage as well. So, whilst we were saying earlier that some of which is very specifically for an album, actually all of this is very easily done these days. That's
it's
how
true.
great technology is these days.
yes. And you use technology at the end of the song as well. There's a bit when Quentin says, "Life is what I want it to be." It does that kind of and which is only really available electronically.
Absolutely.
and works very effectively as well. It suddenly sort of projects him into the world of being the pop star. Suddenly he's got the speech marks, the extra powers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which of course the lyric has already shown you is going to be the case. He's taking control at that point.
Well, I was going to say it's a curious song because when it was presented to me, it was a suite of three individual
three
tunes,
individual songs with just the instrumental chorus.
an instrumental chorus,
And so
we
Paul
just
made the
sort of-
incredibly.
I had to
like-
sort of just go, hang on a sec, there's no chorus here. I don't think we can have it on the album.
Can
and
we
then
have
it was
a
like,
chorus?
Can we have a
Oh, right.
chorus?
Yeah.
And so we.
And then
So it's a
Paul
new
came up
build.
with- that just that little refrain. Life, oh, life is what you want. Life that was Paul's.
kept it ticking along, and we just went, okay, do we like that? We left it for a week or so. We came back to it and went, okay, we've got to
lo and
tune.
behold, it ties the entire thing together.
Yeah, it
It's
really does.
It almost does what a chorus is meant to do in a song.
but that could only have come from our relationship.
Yeah.
The fact that we've been working together for 3.5, 4 years now. These dialogues and the trust that we have with each other meant that we could make these informed decisions further down the line.
And it takes us back to honest conversation as well. Honest conversation is coming from a source you respect. Then it's not a criticism. It's not meant personally. It is meant for the benefit of the work.
Yeah.
And that brings up something
I
better.
think that's the thing. I seem to remember reading in the Spider-Man musical book that, which obviously wasn't a great hit for the boys from U2, but I seem to remember that U2 saying, and it's true of us as well, that when it's about the music, there is no argument.
Yeah.
Because it's not about ego. It's not about who gets their way. It's just about what's best for the music.
Yeah.
And the work is for legacy as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it is.
It's what you're putting out. Isn't it?
You want it to be the best it can be, and you want people to listen to it by the bucket load, hopefully, and give this or give anything that we ever do or anyone ever does a chance.
Yeah.
One can hope no more for culture, if I may say. Good culture, that is. He said, I do make the difference.
Yeah.
I said earlier I was going to use the word sort of squashy and blobby. We are now at that stage. The song "Get Happy" is the kind of March of the Mods
Literally
kind of.
sounds like the
really.
Mr. Blobby song, doesn't it? So
I have,
Blobby is appropriate.
but I like that it's got this blobby, squashy march, and then there's computer game style backing as well. There's a kind of in that kind of 80s, 90s computer game kind of backing. It's
Very NES kind of.
Yes.
It's got a particularly wonderful guitar part by Mickey Howard. All of Mickey's guitar work on this album is just wonderful and really, so rich and adding another harmonic sensibility to it, really. But I particularly love his playing in Get Happy, where he does this guitar part that almost like it's very Devo-esque. It's like the one where it's like wow 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 wow. It's really kind of deconstructing it almost. It's really
There's some
cool.
great flourishes towards the end on the guitar, though, because
Oh,
I've
yeah,
actually written
yeah.
that down. I said wonderful electric guitar backing in extremis.
Well, what's cool is that what Paul's kind of done with all of Mickey's playing is he's kind of made it like he's used it to give the album a natural ramp up of excitement, like because the guitar features more and more, doesn't it, and gets more and more kind of
Mickey gets
present.
his chance to shine, and I think the thing with guitar, especially at the moment, is it's fairly uncool to have guitar in many ways.
Yeah.
And so I had to sort of think, we discussed it, Henry and I, about being tasteful. And when it does shine, it really shines because it's not omnipresent.
So it's once again, we were talking about this earlier. Cutting things out to make them shine when they're there is actually the secret.
And obviously it's
Less is
caught
more.
your attention,
It has,
especially with the solo at the end, which Mickey played it. He was just brilliant to work with, actually, Mickey, and has played for many, many years in many different bands, punk bands, Chelsea and all this sort of stuff. Latin Quarter. So we had a
playing chops, hasn't he?
Yeah, and it was a real delight to work with in the studio, and we chatted. In fact, we worked for 2 days, and we had many tour tales, both of us.
Yarns. And there's once again I have to go back to the lyrics. There's all these wonderful because this ostensibly it's Quentin demanding conformity. Why don't you live more like fish?
Yeah.
And then there's that fantastic business. You're, one of those things that you only get in Codd's psychological books. You're lying on top of a tank of fish connected to a polygraph machine. As long as you're not anxious, you'll be fine. Because they've screwed you to the top of a tank of shark.
Yeah.
And then there's all the fish references. That swim with the fishes. He's using it supposed to be how wonderful it is. But we know what that means.
Dying.
Absolutely. And funny enough, you can tell me that this was all part of your master plan, but if it is, I shall give you £1 each. I don't know if you know, Frankie Howard did a version of Three Little Fishes, Three Little Fishes in the Dam, and they swam right over the dam. It's a kind of nursery song, all right. It's a fairly well-known song. It's been covered by a lot of people, but Frankie Howard, who was a comic years ago, did a manic version of it in the 1950s. Now he gets more and more sort of insane and flustered towards the end, and he's sort of it's almost descending out of words into sound, and it just becomes a sort of as the fish are chased back by sharks. There's a kind of I've written manic Frankie Howard ending.
Yeah.
So
well, maybe Luke knows about that, because that is what Luke does. He just goes completely off the rails.
Oh well, forgive me. That's just an old resonance, even if it's an accidental one. But it's beautiful, and once again it ties in with the fish.
Well, I think with the escalation of the solo as well, I think Quentin's probably, or Luke certainly, is playing off that energy, which just
it's bounced all the way through.
gets
Isn't
to
it?
an end. Yeah,
We're getting towards the end of the album here because it doesn't outstay its welcome. In fact, as I say,
I think our interview's longer than the album.
I think
actually.
so, yeah. But
Well,
probably
twice
as
over,
long.
yeah.
I hope that's all right, chaps.
No,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Much to talk about.
But we get on to what really counts as the dramatic finale of the album and the dramatic finale of the show, which is Take Your Medicine. And as I've got power backing, sense of finale or climax. And then it's interesting here, I think this is one of the few times where the music takes over from the lyrics to tell the story.
Yeah.
I mean, it's... and this goes right back to something we discussed years ago, Henry. One of our first discussions, you said that you started off as a rock singer, and then when you started performing on stage, you realised that people were listening for the lyrics, whereas in the past people were listening for the songs, and you had to fight for the lyrics to be heard, and it was a privilege if they did. Whereas people are sitting down to listen to your lyrics, and you said that was a step change for you.
I think I might have been slightly naive in saying that. I think people still weren't listening to the lyrics.
I was listening, Henry. I was listening.
But. Yeah, I mean this is the rock and roll song. I used to do this with my band Jimmy Getaway back when we first back when they were the house band in Quentin Dentin, and it was completely kind of overlapping what was what. It's a decent rock song, this one.
But as I say, it's the music doing much of the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
It is, but I still think the message. I mean, as I said earlier, this is my favourite song in the show. Because it's got an immediacy to it, which, don't get me wrong, everything has, but this one just grabs me by the balls, and there
Which
it is.
is rare for a record, isn't it?
Well, that's it, and especially for a musical theatre,
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's got an edge.
And you use punctuation very cleverly in it. We were talking about punctuation earlier.
Musically, you mean, or do you mean lyrically?
Musically.
I mean musically, the fact it sort of turns off and then turns back on again.
Yeah.
But that's such a clever. And once again, we're back to theatrical conceit there, because it's you, the audience. It's like a door is being closed.
But we're also back to the radio, which is what it started with.
What did you? Oh, that's a
Sorry,
you're right. Yes.
do you know what? I didn't even think about that.
Do you not, Paul?
I was
But
just-
the
I
album
was
turns
literally-
off at the
I
end
was
and turns
just-
on at the beginning.
Just playing. Just playing. I just think I got bored and just wanted to do something.
I'm sure you
and
did that subconsciously because it's so much there. But it's the voice of
that's
Paul
really
going
funny.
off, on.
Turn it off.
But it has an amazing effect, or several amazing effects. I think there's the comedy effect. The people with the bit where you've seen it on TV 1,000 times, particularly on old sort of variety programs for children. Someone will be complaining on the telephone, and you put the phone down, and then after a minute you pick it up, and they're still going. And there's that comedy sense. Close the door. I'll just see if it's happening. Oh yes, still happening.
It's that sort of Python-esque
Yeah,
thing,
that's it.
isn't it?
Yeah. It doesn't need
yeah.
the viewer for the action to still be continuing, but also the punctuation acts as an abruptness. It acts very beautifully as a perfect full stop, except it's actually a semicolon. That's the trick.
Yeah.
And then there's a gap in the narrative, therefore, because there is that sudden silence where you've turned it off and then turned it on again, where things could have happened and are happening, and we know on stage will have happened. So without giving anything away, you're also explaining that there's a climax going on.
Yes.
So it's so clever. It has its cake and eat it.
I guess something I just thought about is maybe off the back of the Python thing, but it's very British, isn't it?
It
Like
is.
a lot of this show is very British, just in its sense of humour and sort of self-loathing and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And
I'm
I've only
not
just
worthy.
realised that. And I think that's a positive.
It's
It
true.
really is a
It's
positive.
And then the song fades out, which also marks it out as rare in the. But that also has a function. Everything here is on point. It has a purpose, because then that takes us into
And the next song fades in.
the anthem, if you like, which is addressed. And this is the sea change. It's addressed to me, the audience.
Yes,
right.
yes.
And it's you, Henry, I think, isn't it?
It's me on this record. Yeah, it's me in the role as sort of the quote unquote author. Which makes it again addressed directly to the listener.
And we've got the na 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 reference again. So nice. We were talking about those silver threads all the way through. We get back to the pop concert sensation, feelings, being in a stadium. And then, once again, there's the ending is a nice stop. And then Quentin is talking to us, like there's an attempt to pretend it's a suggestion, but we're in an after party.
Yes.
So And that is exactly the feel it's had on the record. You know, suddenly the story of Quentin Dentin has stopped on that last track, Take Your Medicine, and now you are talking to me, Henry. Quentin is talking to me, and you know, I am being drawn into this world, and that's also what the lyrics are telling me is happening as well. I've already been drawn in at the beginning, but you know, it's still drawing me in. It's the end of the record is not the end of the programme.
What was it inspired by, Paul, that idea? You texted me when you were recording with Luke, and you were like, can you write something based on, what was it?
Well, it sort of came from the fact that I wasn't happy with the way that it was sounding. My attention span was not. I was getting through about a minute and a half, and you know, Luke was in the room, and time is money.
Yes.
And you know, he had to go elsewhere and go to work or whatever to record. So I said to Henry, I just need something else. It needs something else. Can you just do this to me? Do this for me. Write something very quickly. It's got to be from you.
You had a reference point. It was that album where, like,
Tom Petty.
Yeah.
Now, Tom Petty had Full Moon Fever in 1989, produced by Jeff Lynne. Back to the ELO. ELO's getting a lot of love in this one. El Dorado earlier. But Tom Petty asks the listener at the halfway point to turn the tape.
Except that it's on CD. So he imagines, he says, this is the break where you would have to turn over the tape if this was on the tape, but it's on CD, so I'm just going to
waffle on for a bit. And then here we go, and then it's back into the next bit, which is fun. It just makes Full Moon Fever, which is a great album. It just feels light-hearted. And then you accept where they're pitching this whole entire project,
but it also has the effect of pulling you out to put you back in again.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and as you were saying earlier, it's a nice short record to listen to a second time. Funny enough, it pulls you back in, and you think, I will, because I invariably then go back to, actually I must say track 2, which is the Quentin Dentin song, if you like, his manifesto, which is more or less where we came in, gentlemen. Yeah. So that brings us to the end of the album, at least on a first listen. It is worth repeated listens, because as we've been talking about, you know, there's so much texture and meaning and so many layers. It's a work of art, this album, I think.
That's very kind.
It's no more than the truth. The reason I took notes is because there's so much going on. I wouldn't have remembered all that. I was determined to get as much as I could out of the album, and I also know that I haven't even finished peeling off the wrappers yet. That every listen will bring me new things. Every new listen has already brought me new things, because this has constantly been on my iPod.
I'm so glad to hear that, and I have to say I agree, and I can say that about something that is ostensibly my album, because it's something that I could never have produced by myself. I still listen to it, and I find new things to appreciate, and I think everyone will. I urge you all to listen to it.
Yeah. Well, the question therefore, and this feels like where we're inexorably leading, how can people find it? Where is it available for them?
Well, it's available for purchase on iTunes, and it's on Amazon, Spotify, and all good streaming music services.
It's a downloadable album.
It's a downloadable album, it's a streamable album, yeah.
I also heartily recommend it. So, gentlemen, what I'd ask you, I suppose, as a kind of final question is, this is the 2018 production of Quentin. When the dust has settled, as it has in some senses, what are you taking away from this? What has this meant to you? What does this mean to you?
To be honest, what it means to me is that this show gets a chance to have another run. Yeah. The idea of making an album was to give the show a future, not look in the past.
And it is very forward-looking. We've been talking about that.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. This represents. This is not just this is not a full stone or a full stop or a capstone on Quentin Dentin. This is the blueprint for the future, and it's my favourite thing that we've done with the Quentin Dentin brand on it. Yeah.
Perfect, gentlemen. It's been a privilege talking to the two of you, actually, if I may say, because you two have impressed me. Well, you two have impressed me. Actually, that sentence finishes there. But you've impressed me with your insights and your understanding, and also your genuine camaraderie and collaboration. I can see the collaboration in front of me.
Well, I think Paul and I are greater than the sum of our parts, and we look forward to talking to you about our
further
things
parts
in the pipeline.
Yeah.
Well, can I tell you, your current baby is a wonderful one. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thos.
Thank you.
Musical talk. Well, there we have it, the creation of a work of art. I've had the privilege to hear the recording, and it's clearly a 5-star album. I think it's the most exciting thing to have come out of British musical theatre in years. It works both as an album in its own right, just something you can listen to and enjoy, and it works fantastically as an original cast album. It really has done something remarkable by being able to do both, but it does. And my enormous thanks to Henry Carpenter and to Paul Garred for taking the time to talk to me about this fascinating subject. They have produced something tremendous. So how can you hear it? I certainly hope that you want to, and any lover of musical theatre should be avidly collecting scores anyway. So where can you find the Quentin Dentin Show album? Well, it's not been released as a physical CD, it is only available online, but you can find it on any good music purchasing and streaming service, certainly including iTunes. So go along there now to find out what all the fuss is about. If you're anything like me, you'll love it. Well, that's it for this week. I've had the most wonderful time talking to some wonderful people about the Quentin Dentin album. It was great talking to Luke Lane over the last 2 weeks, and it was wonderful talking to Paul and Henry for this episode. Such generous people, such lovely people, such talented people. And so to give you time to go off to buy the album, I'm going to sign off this episode now. And here's me doing so. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk edited and presented by Thos. Copyright Musical Talk 2018, except for the songs, where the copyright remains with the original creators. And my thanks to Henry and to Paul for allowing me to play those short extracts in today's episode. My thanks also to Hannah Elsey, the producer of the Quentin Dentin Show, for helping to arrange these episodes. To find out more about the world of musical talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at Musical Talk Thos. So I wonder if you might just mind giving me I wouldn't mind. I'll start that again. Now I'm nervous.
Sorry.
Shake it out.
Yeah.
Shake it out.
That's a different song, I think. I mean, I will be asking you a sort of a roundup question, but is there anything you must have in that you feel that you'd like in?
This has been incredibly thorough.
Yeah, I think we've covered pretty much.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, going through this process, I'm remembering parts that I'd forgotten. You know, and when you finish a project, you move on to the next project. And then today, I've literally just been racking my brains, going, "Oh, of course, yeah, squelchy synth and this and that." And
this is how we were thinking.
All these decisions that you make, you know, over that 4 to 6 month period.
That is it. Are you happy?
Very much so. Yeah, you happy?
Yeah.
I hope that I paid you both the respect you deserve for a masterpiece.
Are you kidding me? That was beyond one of the best interviews I've ever had. Thank you so much.
It's awfully kind.
Thank you.
That's too kind for me. But it was lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.